Stay tuned. Ahead I'll talk with Brian Andrews and Jeffery Wilson about Defense Protocol. It's another in the Tom Clancy Jack Ryan series of novels, and this story revolves around a conflict between China and Taiwan. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Navy veterans Brian Andrews and Jeffery Wilson are the writing team behind the best-selling Tier 1, Sons of Valor, and Shepherd's book series. In addition to writing novels, they have multiple film and television projects currently under development. Brian and Jeffery, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thanks for having us. It's great to be here.
Well, let's start with the plot of this latest book. Where are you taking readers?
So in Defense Protocol, we sort of continue on with the Katie Ryan thread. As you know, she's with the ONI. There's a lot of stuff over the last few years in the news about Taiwan and China's desire to reunify, in their words, Taiwan into mainland China, and the impact that would have on the United States. And to us, it's a really intriguing question because it's so layered. You know, it's not just could they take Taiwan? It's minutes from their coast. They could take Taiwan. We would respond perhaps, and there would be some battle about maybe we get it back. But to us, it's not just that military question. It's such a broader question because the world is different than it was in World War II. If they were to take Taiwan, what are the geopolitical implications? What are, in China's case and ours, the economic impact of something like that? If they take Taiwan, what it does to us from a semiconductor availability point of view, not just us, but Europe, that's huge, right? But what about the economic pressures we would put on them? And so in this book, we pose the question, if they were to make a move on Taiwan, how could they do it in a way that would not devastate their own country economically? And we think that we sort of came up with an intriguing idea. Hopefully, it's not giving them ideas, but that's sort of the what if that we posed at the beginning to get into this story.
I hate when we telegraph what the enemy should do.
I know, right?
So that was going to be one of my questions that, obviously this is a real life situation, so there's a lot to draw on from reality, but obviously from there you have to invent your fiction to drive the narrative. So kind of how do you balance those two things?
I think there's a lot of really smart people, first of all, in both the civilian and military communities that have been looking at this problem for a long time. So these are folks that we talk to, and it's funny we made that joke, but I remember my dad actually asked me, he's like, well, are you sure that you're not giving the Russians ideas? And we sort of laugh and say, like, if we can think of it, somebody else can think of it. I think what makes our job interesting and fun is that we look at all these scenarios and we just sort of war game out what we think is the most plausible one, right? The most plausible one that if this was going to happen tomorrow, here's how it would happen. And then that gives us fodder to go out and talk to the subject matter experts that are in the various communities that we have ties to in the U.S. Navy, Naval Intelligence. And we talk to them, and then we sort of come up with a plot that is based in fiction. But then, there's authenticity about the cat and mouse sort of response and what the U.S. would do. And by doing it this way, using open source materials and talking with people in and out of the community, it allows us to put together a realistic plot, but not something that's going to jeopardize, national security. Because that's always at the top of mind for us, because we both served at the pointy tip of the spear in our various communities. The last thing we want to do is endanger the men and women that are serving there now. So it is fiction. It's based in reality, but we're never going to give away anything that's going to put servicemen and women in danger.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing that makes that easier, because this is a shout out that needs to be given, is the United States Navy. They were so amazing for us. We had the audacity to reach out to them and say, hey, we're writing this book. You want to help out? And, the Navy is fraught with Clancy fans, just like us. When we were on active duty, we were reading Clancy, and they embraced us and really helped us. They connected us with subject matter experts. So that allowed us to get everything right. But more importantly, it helped us with that OPSEC thing. We had people that we could say, hey, what do you think about this? And there were a couple of things that were like, maybe you don't put that in there. That's maybe a little too close to home. So we sort of had that safety net of a very close relationship with people from the E2 all the way up to 9 level that could support our effort to put together a story that would work.
Well, as you mentioned, you've got Katie Ryan in this story, but tell us about some of the other characters that come into play here.
Well, that was what's fun because, starting with Act of Defiance, which was so exciting for Brian, especially as a submariner, but writing Act of Defiance on the 40th anniversary of the Hunt for the Red October sort of was the launch point for this book thematically, because what we really wanted to do was bring the Clancy series. We loved all the books that came before us, but we wanted to sort of bring Clancy back to the origin of Hunt for the Red October and the few books that followed it, because there was something exciting about having that fish out of water with Jack when he was junior. And that's where Katie came from. But we also want to recapture the nostalgia of being, young men reading, Brian will tell stories about he was a submarine officer reading Hunt for the Red October out at sea on a Los Angeles class submarine, like never imagining that one day he'd be here. So that nostalgia is important too for the readers that have been on the journey forever. So having John Clark there, having some of those other characters from the original world, we do introduce, in addition to Katie, she has a brother in the original books, Kyle, that you last saw them when they were little kids. And so he has a little bit of an appearance here. And of course, Jack Jr. now has his own series, but they're a family, and we really like to play up that element of it. So there's a cameo for Jack Jr. Where he's at a family dinner and they're all together. So really fun to go in new directions, but sort of bring along that nostalgia. I think that's what makes the books work.
One of the things I've had the privilege of doing is talking to some other authors who've also written in the Tom Clancy universe, including Mark Graney. And he was telling me about how, like you, he was a fan of Tom Clancy's work. And there was something special between him and his father. Unfortunately, his father passed away before he learned that his son was going to be writing a Tom Clancy novel, a couple of them. So it sounds like there's a real love for the material for a lot of the authors who have been selected to carry on this legacy.
Yeah, and I think that goes into the selection criteria, when you're thinking about passing the torch. And so it's interesting. Tom Colgan, our editor at Putnam, who is the steward of the Clancy legacy in the state. He worked with Tom Clancy when Tom was writing, and he was involved with selecting Mark Graney to carry on that legacy. So Mark started working with Tom. That passing of the torch sort of period happened before Tom passed, and then Mark carried on that legacy. But, after Mark Graney came Mark Cameron. And so Tom and Mark Graney sat down and talked about who would be a good person to carry on the legacy from me. And then the same sort of thing happened with Mark Cameron and Tom Colgan when it came to us. And, this was not our first book. We're not debut authors, and that's important. So there's a vetting process in the marketplace just for Tom Colgan and Mark Cameron to see like, hey, do these guys sort of weave a good yarn, first of all, and they could see that in our existing series, Tier 1. But also, how do they carry themselves? How do they represent themselves as authors in the community? And do the type of stories that they tell fit nicely with this ethos of Tom Clancy? Because that's very important. We're not going to be able to come in there and write like Tom Clancy, but we need to be able to come in there and at least honor the canon and be able to construct the same types of stories with characters who are moral actors and are compelling characters. And that's really, really important. So I think, whenever the day comes that we pass that torch, I assume we'll be involved in that sort of vetting process too.
And I'll say one other thing, which is on the topic, slightly different. But you mentioned there's a big universe, but that big universe is populated with quite a few writers now, and that has become a community. So Don Bentley is a very good friend of ours who was writing the Jack Jr. Now Mike Woodward has taken over that series. We are all in touch. We're both in touch as fans of Clancy and the military genre in general, but as authors in the series, we've all become very close. We were, in fact, just 2 nights ago, we were at an event and Don was there and Mike was there and we were there and we were all in Arizona together. So we have sort of formed this little community, and it makes it easier to have synergy with the books because we know each other. We communicate with each other professionally about the books. we also just like each other. And I think that that is a really big part of it. And one thing that I think is very interesting is right now, everybody that's writing in that universe is a military veteran. Mike is a Navy veteran. We're both Navy veterans. Don was an Army Apache pilot before serving in the FBI. And so that gives sort of a common language that binds us together. But really the relationship is built on a love of these stories and wanting to carry the torch forward.
I'm talking with Brian Andrews and Jeffrey Wilson about defense protocol, and our conversation continues in a moment. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. So, Brian, as you mentioned, there's all this canon, and you do need to respect that to make sure you're not, violating it in some way that really fans would notice. And there's also, as you said, that challenge of sort of being true to Tom Clancy's writing and sort of his spirit, but at the same time needing to exercise your own voice as an author.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think it's daunting when you first take on, first you're excited. You get the call. Of course you say yes, you're excited. And then, the next day it hits and you're like, oh my God, what have I done? And so Jeff and I sort of, we're lucky because there's two of us, so we can bolster each other and we can be a soundboard for each other. And that's a big part of our success. But I think when you look at the Clancy-verse and the fandom, you see that you have this responsibility. You see how passionate people are about getting it right. And I think that there's a particular challenge that maybe some of the readers and listeners might not appreciate is that, there's 40 years of canon. And, we have the book we just wrote, Defense Protocols, number 25. It's a challenge, to take 40 years of story and synthesize it. The world is not the same place that it was 40 years ago. And so we have to find a way to make this book exciting and new, but also feel familiar and and not disappoint people, but also be authentic. So these things are sometimes at odds with each other. And so what we try to do is say, okay, the readers are smart and they're going to give us some license. It's just not too much license to change things. And so what we try to do is the core story has to be exciting and dramatic and fun. And then our licenses, okay, maybe this is a little different than what Mark Cameron did or a little different than what Tom said, but it's close enough that people will accept the fact that, hey, this story happened 15 years after the one that we maybe had something that we changed a little bit. And I think for the most part, people accept that. Would you agree, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we can sort of bridge that a little bit by giving little shout outs, which is something we do. We do reference other books, both the original Tom books, especially in Act of Defiance, but he's even, some of the grainy stuff that he did with Tom and by himself, some of Cameron's work. We'll call out little stories from those in these newer books. We do that in Defense Protocol. And I think that makes that it bridges it a little bit, right? They can feel that it's continuing in the universe, even if there's a little tweak here or there. And the person that makes it easy, for me, it's Brian, obviously, but is Tom Colgan. Tom is an incredible editor. He is truly, like Brian said, the steward of the universe, and he's so knowledgeable. And not just about the subject matter, the books and the plots and the stories, but the fans. He knows where he can tell you, people aren't going to like that, or they'll be okay with this. And he's the one that encouraged us to write in our own voice, like you were saying earlier, Don. Like this idea that, you can't write Clancy's voice, just honor his stories. And so he's very supportive. So he's really good at telling us where we succeeded and failed so that we can fix it. And he's a really important part of the team for that.
I do have one question about process, because you're a writing team. So how does that work?
Yeah, it's so bizarre, right? Like I don't know how that works. There's a handful of us out there. And this is an interesting thing for your listeners, maybe. There's a handful of successful writer teams. Preston and Child come to mind. Kathy Coulter wrote with J.T. Ellison for a while. There's a few. But when you get us all together on a panel, which we've done a few times, what's interesting is that, and you ask about process, they're all radically different. And what works for them would never work for us. And when we say, oh, here's how we do it, they all look at us like, you're making that up. It can't possibly work. But one of the things that is different about the way we do it is probably because we're both Navy veterans. And you bring that team and mission before self ethos into your DNA after you serve for a long period of time, and it becomes who you are. And so Brian and I both have that mindset of ego is aside. I think that's the hardest part in writing as a team is putting aside your ego. Oh, my chapter is so good, and oh, don't you dare change this or whatever. We have none of that in our process. Believe it or not, we actually write simultaneously. So we divide books into 3 acts. Like most people, we divide acts into chapters. We write multiple points of view. And so I might be writing, mostly Jack Ryan's point of view. He might be writing mostly Katie's point of view or the bad guy, or I'm doing John Clark. But we're writing chapters at the same time. So I'm doing chapter 1 and 2 and 5 and 11. He's doing the others. And it requires constant communication. We've been doing it a long time, so I kind of know what he's going to probably do with a certain problem. We talk 6 or 7 times a day sometimes. But the key to me, I think, is every chapter or 2, we swap them. And whatever he wrote, I rewrite that chapter. And it's total faith. There's no ego. He's like, change whatever you want. You don't have to ask. And we don't ask. We just rewrite. And then it goes into a master file. And so that gives us the voice consistency, but it also gives us, sort of that ability to lift each other up and know what the other guy is doing and get it all right. So that's how we do it. It sounds insane, especially since we don't outline. It seems impossible, but that's our process, as bizarre as it sounds.
There's another question I like to ask authors of fiction, and it's this. If you could spend a day in real life with one of the characters from the novel, who would it be and why?
I mean, in this book, it's clearly Jack Ryan. I mean, I've never been in the Oval Office, never stepped foot in it. I would love to just follow him around for the day, and spend time in the Oval Office, go to the Situation Room, see what it's really like. I mean, we've all seen The West Wing, right? And I think there's a lot of authenticity there. But what is it really like? And I always feel like, the president is put on a pedestal, and for good reason, but he's still just a man, right? And so, we try to incorporate that actually into the storytelling, is this idea that, Jack doesn't have a crystal ball. He's not prescient. He doesn't know everything. And so you have this team. You have a team around you. You have your chief of staff. You have the Mary Pat Foley, who's director of national intelligence in the series. And then you have the operators like John Clark, who's in the field, and now Katie, and you have to really put a lot of trust in people, knowing that if something is wrong or they give you bum information, probably by accident, but you could be sabotaged too inside your own chain of command. So there's political machinations happening. So at the end of the day, that trust requires you to make a decision, and then all that responsibility falls on your shoulders. So I really can't imagine what that feels like to have the weight of the nation. And because it's a global economy, like Jeff was saying, a decision that you make could affect not just the citizens of the United States, but have global implications and affect billions of people. How do you get through the day carrying that weight on your shoulders? It'd be interesting to spend the day with Jack Ryan.
So I can't give the same answer. So I'll just spend most of my day being jealous that Brian is with Jack. But I think that I would be equally as fascinated to be with Katie for different reasons, though. Like, I think that what intrigues me about Katie Ryan is this idea that Katie is young Jack, but she doesn't even know it. And as a parent myself, my kids are now, our youngest is 9, but we've got a young adult child, and we've got 2 in high school getting ready to go off into their college years and careers. I understand my relationship with my daughters from my point of view. It'd be very fascinating for me to walk through Katie's relationship with Jack from her point of view, because we were highly intentional about writing her that way. This idea that she is so young Jack, but she didn't know Jack when he was young. To her, her dad is the president of the United States and the former CIA director. She doesn't really, never really had a relationship with him when he was that junior analyst hunting down the Red October. And so it would be really interesting for me to spend a day with her, get to know her better, and talk to her about her relationship with her dad, which she would probably be reluctant to do because she likes to play it down. But I think that would be my choice.
Well, this current book is Defense Protocol. It's by Brian Andrews and Jeffery Wilson. And what's next for you as a team?
We have multiple series going, which is one of the blessings that we have as an author team, is that we've been able to pursue not only the estate writing with Clancy, but we have our primary series, which is called Tier 1. We're working on book 9 in that series. It's got a big fan base. So anybody who's listening that knows Tier 1, rest assured, Dempsey will be back next year in Tier 1 book 9. We have a spin-off series called Sons of Valor. Sons of Valor 4 is the next book in that series. It comes out next July. And then our third series is called The Shepherds, and Dark Rising is book 4 in that series. It comes out in April. And so, lots of great stuff. All of our other 3 series are going to have books out in 2025.
Blessing and a curse to have many series. Just I feel obligated to say that publicly for my wife's benefit. And we've been very blessed recently with some success in media. So the Tier 1 series is now we're super excited to say that it's been optioned for television. We've partnered with Skydance Television for that, and we already have 2 amazing people attached to produce in Peter Johnson and Marcus Blakely, who have become good friends. So we're very excited that we're involved as executive producers on that project and working with that. And you can go to our website and see we've got another dozen or so media things going on in various stages of development. So it's busy. There's always something. There's always something new coming from Andrews and Wilson.
Well, since you mentioned the website, give us the address.
Andrews-Wilson.com. Very easy. Andrews-Wilson.
The book is Defense Protocol by Brian Andrews and Jeffery Wilson. It's part of the Tom Clancy Jack Ryan series of novels. Brian and Jeffery, thanks for talking with me today.
Thanks for having us on, Dan.
We really appreciate it. Enjoy this conversation a lot, Don. You're great.
If you'd like to purchase Defense Protocol, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.